Reece Carter's debut novel has made a splash around the world. A Girl Called Corpse has been sold in multiple territories and has been praised by some of the biggest names in the publishing industry. While Reece started a career as a nutritionist at first, he always wanted to write children's novels, and now he writes full-time, thanks to an international bidding war that resulted in a 3-book deal. Thanks so much for joining us today, Reece.
Valerie, thank you for having me. This is the first time we've spoken, but I feel like I'm chatting to an old friend because your voice is so familiar from Australian Writers Centre.
Because you've done several of our courses, but the result has been this incredible book. You have such a fresh voice. It is such a great story. I loved it so much. And I want people to know that even if they're an adult, they should read this book because I think what you've created is truly something special.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Congratulations. So the book I'm talking about, which is your debut novel, A Girl Called Corpse, can you please tell everyone what it's about?
Right. Yeah, I sure can. So A Girl Called Corpse is, as the title suggests, a spooky fantasy. So it's a spooky middle grade fantasy. And it's about a kid ghost who really does not want to be a ghost. So what she wants is her memories back of her life. She wants to know what her real name was. She wants to know who her family was. And so when we meet her at the start of the book, she actually doesn't look like what you might imagine a ghost to look like. She's got a body made of wax, seaweed for hair, polished abalone shells for eyes. And when she learns that there is a treasure which can reunite her with all of those lost memories, she sets off to find it, accompanied, of course, by her loyal sidekick, a very brave and very chatty huntsman spider by the name of Simon.
I love Simon, and we're going to talk more about Simon later. But first of all, how in the world did you come up with this idea? It's so unique.
This is very much a case of character first. I wasn't living where I am now. I was in an older house, and it kind of, creaked and groaned. It felt like maybe there might be a ghost there somewhere anyway. And I was trying to get to sleep one night and my eyes had adjusted to the darkness. And then I looked up and the manhole in the ceiling was slightly ajar for no reason. I hadn't gone up there. My housemate hadn't gone up there. Still to this day, cannot explain why it might have been open. So, of course, I completely flipped out and got scared. When I was brave enough to kind of jiggle it shut with a broom and hid under my blanket again, I started to think who or what might be up there. And I came up reasonably quickly with this idea of this character corpse, and I saw her reasonably fully complete there and then. There were a few changes that were made, but what I definitely knew right from the beginning was that she was very lonely and that she was kind of mourning her family and mourning this sense of belonging and having somewhere to belong, mourning her name, but also that she was mourning something on this side of her death as well, that she'd recently lost a friend, who is another character that we meet a little bit later. I won't give too much away, but this sense of what she wanted and who she was really, really strong. And that dictated the plot, really. So it was knowing her as a character. I was like, and what she wanted, I was like, well, now I have to write the story where she does or does not find that.
Now, what age group would you say this is for?
So this is for 8 to 12-year-olds. I think in terms of the writing level, it's pretty firmly in that middle grade area. Some of the characters are a little bit spooky. There's some darker, more chilling moments in there. So I think it'll depend on what each individual kid is comfortable with, but 8 to 12-year-olds.
Yeah. Oh, it's a fantastically written story. How did you create this world? Because it's a fantastical world with unusual characters who are not your normal humans. Well, how in the world did this enter your head? Because it's so believable.
So thank you, firstly. That's very kind of you to say. Firstly, the landscape itself was based very much on the southwest of Australia. So I'm from WA and we used to holiday as a family when I was a child, 2 weeks every summer. And when you're a kid, those summer holidays, 2 weeks feels like a lifetime. They stretch out, they're huge adventures. And now my mum lives there. So whenever I go back to WA, I do visit her there. And it's this landscape that is so beautiful, but also so rugged and isolated. And it does feel like maybe it hides some magic in its corners. And so I decided to set Corpse's story in this really completely fictional town, but based on that part of the world. And then the rest, honestly, was just pure imagination. I think because I'd already decided on such a bizarre protagonist, it kind of freed me to be like, okay, well, I'll just be weird in every aspect of this story, not question my instincts too much, and just hope, like anything, that it works. And thankfully it did.
Now, I want to come back to the story and certain elements of your writing process and some of your choices as well, which I think people will be really interested in. But I want to talk about the fact that this book has already gone bonkers and it's been sold in so many different territories, and you're about to go to the UK to promote it and all the rest of it. But let's talk about the lead up to it. How did this get... I understand, first of all, that it's not the first novel you've written. You've actually written other manuscripts. Tell us what happened to those and then how this one eventually became the one.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the short story is that nothing happened with those, which I think is probably a common story. Every quote, quote unquote, overnight success, there's usually a string of failures that come beforehand. And that was certainly the case with me. I'd written 3 other manuscripts, 2 of them middle grade, 1 young adult, none dark, none like this. They were kind of more in that whimsical fantasy kind of genre. And they just didn't sell, frankly. They didn't sell. And I was feeling pretty defeated and pretty despondent. And it was actually whilst writing the 3rd one that I was advised to do you're going to know the course name better than me. Was it Writing for Children and Young
Writing
Adults?
Children's novels, it's called now. Yeah, writing children's novels.
So it was actually I'd written this 3rd one. The first 2 I understood why they didn't sell. Perhaps they were a little bit, familiar. I'd kind of written to trend, written things I'd already seen that had been done better before. Still valuable because I kind of cut my teeth, I suppose, writing those stories. The 3rd one I had a lot more hope for. I was getting some good feedback from, critique partners and so on. So I went to get a manuscript assessment from a freelance editor who basically said, fairly quickly, you need to go into a writing course, go to Australian Writers Centre. And so so whilst I was editing the 3rd manuscript, I was doing writing children's books. And feeling pretty good about the book, but it still didn't sell. And you can imagine not feeling great about myself at that stage. And then a friend of mine who's another author, Tobias Madden, you might know him, suggested, well, Reece, why don't you just try, go easy on yourself. Why don't you try writing short stories for a little while? Because they're less of a task. You can do them and get that satisfaction of having completed a project in a shorter space of time. And so then I went and did the short. I was like, that's actually a good idea. That might make me feel, reignite that fire. So that's when I did the short stories course. I think it's Short Stories Essentials. And I'd never written a short story before. And I was like, oh, this is actually really fun. And so there was an Australian publisher they were about to publish a horror anthology for YA horror. And so I thought, oh, I'll write a story for that and I'll enter. I knew how to structure a story. I knew I had the tools of the trade. I wrote A Girl Called Corpse in 6 months. I had such a strong idea of what it was. I sat down, I wrote it. And then I just thought, I'm just going to send it to my dream agent. I'm just going to do it. Why not? I'd read this agent's name in the acknowledgement sections of, books by writers whom I admire so much, Jessica Townsend, B.B. Alston, Sophie Anderson, all these people. I thought, I'm just going to do it. And I sent it and I felt really good about myself for about 5 minutes. And then I called Tobias again. And I was like, what have I done? I sent my manuscript to Gemma Cooper. It was not ready. But thankfully she loved it, took it on. And it's, the rest happened very quickly with her. Yeah.
Describe the rest.
So the rest, this is where it gets really fun. So the rest, Gemma was a very editorial agent. We did some work on it together and then she took it to publishers. So we went on submission with the book. And having had kind of no interest in books, any of my previous manuscripts, to suddenly get the amount of interest that we did on this book was just so overwhelming and so exciting. And so all of a sudden overnight, I was taking meetings with publishers here and in the UK. I was getting emails about various different co-agents in other territories, kind of Italy, Spain, Norway, selling the book there. And it all just happened. It was all just, my head was spinning. My head was absolutely spinning. And then once I'd taken these meetings with the different publishers, Gemma then took the book to auction. So I'm sure some of the listeners are already familiar with what an auction, auction for a book looks like. But for those who aren't, it kind of takes place over about 48 hours. And basically, it's just a string of very exciting emails coming in from my agent. So every offer that would come in from a publisher would be sent to me. I'd be able to see it verbatim. And then there would be a second round. So it all happens over 48 hours. And then it's done. And you've sold your book. And again, you're still reeling from how fast it's all happened. Or I
Oh
was.
my goodness. Well, yeah, I think, justifiably so. So that's just absolutely brilliant. I'm so excited for you. So then at the end of the auction, you and your agent assess the offers and come to a decision. Is that correct?
That's correct. So you don't have to necessarily go with the highest bidder. There doesn't have to be a case that we reserve the right to kind of assess the offers in a more kind of holistic way, work out which is going to be the best deal, also who I think might be the best fit for the book. And that's where those meetings with publishers that had taken place beforehand were really valuable, because I sat down with the publishers, with the people who would be, doing structural edits on the book, people who would be overseeing the creative around illustration and design. And so I got a real sense of not only who shared my vision for the book, but also publishers that would work well together in different territories. And so I think even as the auction was taking place, I had there were some front runners. And so once my agent and I sat down and kind of chatted about it, it was pretty unanimous that we'd found the dream team for Corpse.
So in terms of at the moment, which territories is it being published in?
So Australia and New Zealand and the UK will be simultaneous publication, which is now. And then Italy, Spain, and Norway are the other territories that will be coming out in, but we don't have dates yet.
How did you feel when all of this was happening? How did you feel?
I still don't think I believe it, Valerie. Like, my name is printed on the book and I'm thinking there must be some other Reece Carter. I mean, obviously this is the stuff dreams are made of. You're overwhelmed, but it's still such a pinch me moment. And I still don't think I've completely wrapped my head around it. But specifically those translation deals, I think you always hope for something like that. You hope for them. You're aware that they happen. But you're not necessarily, my head hadn't even gone there yet. I was just thrilled to have even found one publisher in one territory. So the idea that it would be translated into other languages and I'd be reaching kids who speak languages that I don't even speak was just, absolutely thrilling, and such an added bonus that I never could have imagined.
Well, I have no doubt they're not going to be the only territories. It's only going to grow from here. So you mentioned the courses of writing children's novels and short story essentials. What did you get out of the course that was then helpful for you in your writing and getting published?
So really good question. And I'm going to start by actually saying, I think I was really reluctant to do a course when I was given that advice. And I'm not because not because I thought I was, above it or didn't need it, but I think everyone, when they get to a point where they've already worked on a story for a really long period of time, it's a little bit gut-wrenching to think, oh, maybe I actually don't have a clue what I'm doing. And so I was a little bit reluctant, and immediately what I learned and what I took away was I didn't have the practical skills. I thought that imagination was enough to write a story. And what I took away from both courses, we'll talk about the first course, what I learned from writing children's books was that story has a shape, and that I needed to take the time to learn, have a better understanding of the 3-act structure, have a better understanding of how to build tension, have a better understanding of how the different tools work, character point of view. And again, especially with 3-act structure, I know there is some reluctance with kind of writers early on, because they think, if we all write in the 3-act structure, we're just writing the same book with slight changes. But it's not that at all. Like, having a really good understanding of how structure works, why those different points are there throughout a story, actually frees you and liberates you to then take any idea and shape it into a story that works. And I think that's why A Girl Called Corpse, even though it's such a strange concept, works, is because from the course I had really learned the 3-act structure and kind of hammered that in. That kind of practical understanding then freed me to tell the stories that I really wanted to tell. And then the second, interestingly, telling the short story essentials course, although I've never written another short story since that one I mentioned, it really taught me to tighten my writing. It really, really taught me to tighten up plot, kind of be really efficient and effective with my language. Because when you're writing a short story, you've only got, several thousand words to work with. And so those skills I took back into writing novels, and it's just made my writing so much tighter.
So you say that you wrote A Girl Called Corpse in 6 months. You also have another career, or previously had another career as in the world of health as a nutritionist. Were you writing it while you were having a full-time job? Were you writing it, while you were doing other things, or did you focus on it full-time? Talk us about how much time you dedicated with your bum in the chair.
Yeah, so with The Girl Called Corpse, I was still working full time at that stage, and I would be getting up at 4 a.m. to write. I found that I needed to be up before emails started happening, before my phone might go off. That was when my head was clearest. So I would be up at 4 a.m. I'd sit down, have about two or three very strong coffees between 4 a.m. and 7 a.m. And I'd just get 3 hours of writing done every day before I'd kind of then walk the dog, go to the gym, start my day. So that was, and do you know what though? The thing is, now that I've now left that career in health behind and I am writing full time, I'm not convinced I do all that much more writing in a day. I still don't think, even though I've got all this time now, I still have a few really good hours first thing in the morning when my head is clear. And then not much happens for the rest of the day until I've now discovered a new kind of hour at about 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. where I can go in and do a little bit of editing and tinkering and that kind of thing.
Maybe you were conditioned in that way because you wrote, while you had a full-time job. So in those hours from 4 till 7 when you were writing this book, were you achieving a similar word count each day, or did it vary? And were you aiming to achieve a specific word count?
I think the second part of that question is the really interesting one, because I'm probably one of the only writers I know who doesn't set word count goals. And it would vary widely. Some days I might wake up and in that time I might only get between 300 and 500 words out. Other times it might be 2,000 words. But I didn't see one as a more successful writing day than the other, because I think often when you get fewer words out, you'll be solving problems, or you'll be fixing dialogue, or making something work that didn't work before, which is still just as valuable part of the process. So for me, at least, word count, I think if I was to let myself get distracted by word count, I just don't think it would be a particularly interesting metric for me, or I don't think that, I think it could distract me from what's actually important, which is just sitting down every day, putting the work in, seeing it improve.
So did you know what was going to happen at the start?
So I'm a plotter. And then my books look nothing like what I set out to write by the time they're done. So I sat down. I'm not sure you've probably read, or at least know of, The Little Prince, the French book,
Le Petit Prince.
Yeah, Le Petit Prince, exactly. So I initially set out when I initially plotted it, I plot my books in like an Excel spreadsheet, just kind of making sure I hit all of those markers, in the first, second, and third acts, your midpoint, everything you need, in very brief, just a few sentences. And initially, A Girl Called Corpse was going to be very much like The Little Prince, where she was going to head off from the rock that doesn't exist, which is where she haunts, and go to the town of Elston Fright and meet these various, one after the other, meet in, it was going to be the butcher, the merchant, the jeweler, and the thief, I think. And at each person that she met in this town, she would learn something new about herself, kind of very much like The Little Prince does, And then very quickly, that wasn't going to work. That got thrown out. All of those characters, the merchant still exists and the thief still exists, but they're now called the fisher. But the whole plot changed completely. So, and the same was true. I've just written a sequel. I've just written the second book, and the same is true. I looked at the kind of synopsis the one-page synopsis that I wrote for it, and I don't think there's a single plot point that survived.
But how useful then is it for you to have that structure, even though it doesn't end up like that at all? How essential is that for you to start? Or are you going to give it up now?
No, I think I'll still keep it because it's nice to at least have an idea of where you're going, even if I think I need to have that vague idea, that plot, to begin writing. But then ultimately, you have to be ready to let go of it, or I have to be ready to let go of it and follow my characters and also follow kind of what feels right, both as a writer, but also as a reader. I think when you're writing, or at least I'm always coming back and then trying to view it through the lens of a reader. And if something doesn't work, I know I've got to be ready, not too proud to deviate from what I'd initially planned, and instead just kind of honor what the book needs and what the story needs. But first and foremost, it really needs to be driven by the characters. Like the decisions they make need to feel true to the character you've created. And I think sometimes having too firm an idea or too firm a plan of how the plot's going to roll out can get in the way of that.
So let's talk about the characters, because based on what you've just said, you had a very strong sense of Corpse from the beginning, from that, when you first thought about it, and you had a real sense of what she was searching for and, her place in the world and all of that. But there are all these other characters as well who are really unique. And to what level did you go through characterization before you started either plotting or writing? How well did you know your characters? Because unlike humans, because you know someone like John, someone like, Davo or whatever. So, but you don't know ghosts, you don't know huntsman spiders, you don't know witches. Do you have to know your characters in a great deal of depth in order for you to be able to start writing?
That's a very interesting question. I hadn't actually kind of considered it like that, because I think I still write, whether it's ghosts or witches, they still write them as people, or they, and I think as readers, all my readers, I assume, will be human. And so for a story to be impactful, like you still have to identify with the characters. And I was actually having this chat the other day with my agent. We were talking about Corpse, and we both admitted we forget all the time that she is a ghost. We forget all the time, because even though she is a ghost, you have to write her as a kid. You have to write her as a kid, your reader's age, and as relatable. And so I think that hopefully in all the characters, there is some sort of, even the most non-human-like ones, unhuman-like ones, those that are, very, very strange, I still think there are very relatable human elements to them. The one exception perhaps is Simon the Spider, who I think is just my dog, shrunk down and given extra legs.
Oh, that is so interesting that you said that, because Simon, I really like Simon. And I think one of the reasons I like him is because I feel that, so for readers or potential readers, Simon is Corpse's friend, and he is a huntsman spider, and because they're friends, they hang out and they talk and stuff, but he doesn't actually speak any words. He generally communicates through clicks. This is not giving anything away. And so just what I loved is the fact that even though Simon doesn't really speak words that we understand, he has such a strong voice. And I tried to figure out why do I think Simon has such a strong voice? Now, I have my theories, but I like to ask you that question.
Oh, I definitely want to hear your theories afterwards, though, because that sounds interesting. So for me, as I kind of mentioned, Simon is, and I only realized this kind of in hindsight, Simon is definitely my dog. My dog Hagrid is definitely, like, he's maybe a spider, but he acts like a very small dog. And I spend a lot of time talking to my dog, who cannot talk back to me, and yet I'm still completely convinced that we're having a conversation. I think anyone with pets, or most people with pets, when they're alone and no one's looking, they have a little chat to their pet, right? And you always like to imagine what they might be saying back. And so I was surprised at how easy that was to write, because I didn't want to write a talking animal. I thought that would age the book down too much. But Corpse also couldn't have a ghost sidekick or a human sidekick, because we'd already established she was really lonely. And so a huntsman spider that lived in the roof with her made sense. So I was trying to work out, okay, well, how do I do that? How do I have a character she can communicate with that is not a talking animal. Huntsman spiders do talk by clicking. They rub the hairs on their leg together and make a clicking sound. That's how they communicate. And I was like, okay, well, let's just have it that Corpse can understand that clicking sound. And then, of course, to communicate that to the reader, because they need to be able to understand what Simon is saying too. I just really had to pay attention to Corpse's reactions to him in the discussion. So there had to be enough in how Corpse reacted to his clicks for the reader to be able to glean what it was that he was saying.
And it's so clear because the way that you've written it, Simon really has a voice. And so, yeah, absolutely. It is in what happens after Simon does his clicks that you figure out what he's essentially said. And you actually, as a reader, feel really clever and satisfied when you've done that. Simon communicates via these clicks, which is a oral thing. One of the things that I noticed about the way you write, it really encompasses the five senses more so than actually a lot of books, particularly sound, which is something often writers overlook because it's writing. Was that a conscious decision?
It was, yes. So 2 points on that. So again, that the tip of writing with all five senses was another one I picked up from, I think it was when I was doing the course with Pamela Freeman, the writing children's books. And so that is very conscious. I'm always conscious if something reads flat or how do I immerse the reader more? And it's always through engaging senses that I haven't for a little while. And so I'll read back over what I've done. Specifically with the sounds, and I know what you mean, kind of animals have different noises. We hear the rain dripping on or water dripping on top of the shack, etc. That I think I was probably inspired by Cressida Cowell doing that. I'm not sure if you've read the Wizard of Once series, but she does that a lot. And I think it's really kid friendly, and I think it's really kind of vivid. So yeah, that was a deliberate choice, and I've kind of tried as much as possible to come up with new words for familiar sounds, so that you can have that oral experience as well.
Your other life as a nutritionist, did you always want to write children's books? When did you decide you want to write children's books, and where did nutrition kind of fit into your path?
Yeah, so I wanted to write children's books ever since I was ever since I was a reader of children's books, I was going to say, which I still am, but ever since I was a child, when I was a middle grade reader, so when I was 10 or 11, I think I really fell in love with reading. And then I was about 12 when I think I'd done a creative writing task in English class, and I had this wonderful teacher, Mr. Webb, and he really liked it, and he kind of showed this faith in me way back then and encouraged me to write my own stories. And he used to actually let me skip class sometimes on the condition that I'd go to the library and just write. I'm sure if he's listening, you didn't let me skip class. You let me kind of do self-guided learning at the learning center. That's what that was. That show of faith then meant so much to me as a kid, and I took it very seriously, and I loved those, hours at the library writing. And I just never stopped. I never stopped. So I wanted to do that ever since I was young. But, being a writer is not the most straightforward career path. I will say that it's, absolute riotous fun, but it's not the most straightforward career path. And so I did need another option. And nutrition and health was a genuine interest of mine as well. So that's what I studied at university. I did a degree in health science, master's in human nutrition, and had that career. But all the time I was, all the while I was still writing by night or writing first thing in the morning. And so I've always wanted to do this.
Brilliant. So you've now written your second book. You've written the sequel. Is that right? Is it
That's
finished?
Right, yeah. The first draft is finished, and it's gone to my publisher, and she actually popped by the other day to let me know that she'd read it and loved it, thankfully, because as you can imagine, that's a nerve-wracking experience. Writing a second book, especially if it's contracted, is a completely different beast to writing that first book.
Tell us why.
So it's completely different because I think you put a lot more expectation on yourself. I will say nobody put pressure on me, but as a writer, you are very aware all of a sudden that there are other like stakeholders who are already invested in this book, and that you're with a first book, you're writing it hoping that people will love it, hoping that someone will want to publish it. But if it doesn't happen, the only person you really let down is yourself. Whereas there is this sense of, especially when it had been contracted to multiple publishers in different countries who are waiting to read this new manuscript, suddenly my writing room, my office, felt like there were a whole lot of other presences there, not just me. It wasn't just me and my laptop, but I'm thinking of each of my publishers, my editors, what they might be expecting or hoping for from the manuscript, which of course you can't predict. You need to just write the story that you want to write. But sometimes it is harder to get out of your head and into writing when you feel like you've got that set of expectations.
Yeah, wow. So when you wrote the first book, so when you wrote this one, A Girl Called Corpse, did you already know that there was going to be more to the story? And yeah.
No, I initially wrote A Girl Called Corpse as a standalone. And it was through a conversation with my agent whilst we were doing some editing on it together that she actually suggested a sort of alternate ending to the book that left things open. And I was so glad that she did, because it's a world that I didn't want to leave. The world of Elston Fright, I feel like even as its writer, it's constantly surprising me. And I feel like there's a secret around every corner waiting to be discovered. And so I'm really glad that I get to continue writing stories in this world. But it wasn't planned initially. It was through a conversation with my agent. She was like, I think this should happen at the end. I agreed, rewrote it. So when we took it to publishers, we did pitch it as a series.
Right. So then when you wrote the second one, did you also do the 4 till 7 thing? Like, were you working at that time already? And how long did it take you?
So by that stage, we signed on for 3 books firstly. So that gave me the confidence to know, okay, I can take the leap. I can write full time. And so I gave up my career in health, and I was writing full time by the time I started drafting the second book. I'd no longer set an alarm at 4 o'clock to wake up, but I still did just naturally get up early, and found that my best writing was done in the morning. I would try throughout the day, but I was just much less effective. It was just, and then I would do a little bit in the evening. So even though I had all this extra time, writing the second book took me a year. I did miss a couple of deadlines. I had to push. I did what I really didn't want to do as an author. And I had to push deadlines back, and it took a lot longer.
Yeah. Okay. And the writing for middle grade, authors who write for middle grade are, and of course other ages, but especially for middle grade, are often very popular for school visits and school appearances and kids writing festivals and that sort of thing. Is that the sort of thing that you're interested in, or, you'd rather just sit at home and write?
I mean, look, I think like a lot of writers, I'm a complete introvert, and so the idea of sitting just home and writing stories is very appealing. But of course, actually going out and meeting readers, young readers of my story is very exciting. So we've already got quite a few school visits lined up that are coming up, and I cannot wait. And we're teaching them how to create their own spooky characters, which will be very fun. So I've developed a workshop for that. I will say I'm equal parts excited and terrified, because kids are so smart and they're the keenest readers. And, there have been so many grown-up sets of eyes on this book now, but it will be kids who spot the plot holes and, the little things the little mistakes I've made. So, and I'm a little bit terrified to have them point out where I've made mistakes.
Why have you chosen this as your sweet spot? I mean, I know you said that you had an unpublished one that was sort of YA, but obviously you like middle grade. Why have you chosen that age group? What resonates with you so much about it?
I think there are a few things. I think it was, what was it that Philip Pullman said. I think it was some. I'm paraphrasing, but it was some themes and subjects are too big to be dealt with in an adult book. They can only be adequately addressed in a kid's book or something like that. And I do think you have the opportunity to tackle really big themes: love, friendship, right, wrong, good, evil, in a way that you can't in books for older readers. I think middle grade is the sweet spot where you can really do that. I also think that what I love about middle grade books is that they are always hopeful. They have to be hopeful. Even this dark, spooky story, A Girl Called Corpse, it is ultimately a hopeful story about friendship and found family and belonging and bravery. And you need, even as an adult, it's especially now, I think we all need those hopeful stories, right? And then, of course, there's the fact that you ask any grown up, like you ask any adult, what's your favorite book? More often than not, they will mention a book from when they were a young reader themselves. Like I think books for kids this age have such an opportunity to make a real impact. And I know that when I was a reader at 10, 8, 9, 10, especially 10, 11, 12, these books were so important to me. Stories were so important to me. And to imagine that I could ever have that, like I could create any kind of impact, similar impact for a young reader is, that's very rewarding.
And I just want to assure listeners that even though Reece has used the word dark a few times, and you might have a sensitive child reader or something, honestly, it is beautiful and hopeful, and you don't have to worry about it being too dark. So, go and get it.
Thank
All
you.
right. So, no, because I am one of those readers who's a bit sensitive to those sorts of things. So I get it that some people are concerned sometimes, and I just wanted to assure people that there's nothing to worry about.
Yeah.
All right. So I think that it's going to go amazing. It's already gone amazing. So what would your top 3 tips be to aspiring writers who were in a position where you were not that long ago, but now you've gone bonkers? The book's gone bonkers.
I mean, the first one's going to sound like an absolute cliche, but genuinely don't give up. Like if it's something you really want and it is something you love, like you can't predict it. It happens at different times for everyone, but I do genuinely believe if you keep at it, you will have success. So don't give up. Secondly, I think there are 2 things to do. The first one is learn your craft. No matter where you're at, I think it's worth making sure that you've learnt your craft, you've done your study, the kind of you've got all your tools well and truly sharpened and ready to go. And then once you know that learnable stuff really, really well, that's when you can then kind of lean into my last piece of advice was lean into the weirdest parts of your imagination, like lean into the strangest, newest ideas and trust them, trust your instincts and trust those big ideas.
Fantastic. Love it. Congratulations. And thank you so much for your time today, Reece.
Thanks, Valerie.